On March 23, 2016, 25 recordings were added to the National Recording Registry at the United States Library of Congress. Among these were some of the 20th century's most iconic US American recordings, such as A Love Supreme, Let Me Call You Sweetheart, and Where Did Our Love Go? By definition, all of the recordings added to the National Recording Registry are culturally, historically, or aesthetically important, and/or inform or reflect life in the United States. But US American culture is very nuanced and comes from a variety of different sources. And while it did technically represent part of US American culture, one of the songs added to the registry traveled a long way to get there. Let's talk about Die Moritat von Mackie Messer, commonly known as Mack the Knife.
Look out, old Mackie is back!
Right now, I'm in the Mitte district of Berlin, Germany, and I'm just steps away from the Theater am Schiffbauerdamm, the place where on August 31st, 1928, one of the most influential works of the 20th century was premiered. Die Dreigroschen Oper, or, in English, the Threepenny Opera. In a draft narration for the show, playwright Bertolt Brecht wrote that you are about to hear an opera for beggars. Since this opera was intended to be as splendid as only beggars can imagine, and yet cheap enough for beggars to be able to watch, it is called the Threepenny Opera. The show follows the criminal Mackie as he navigates Victorian London, mixing comedy with tragedy and commenting on the hypocrisies of bourgeois capitalist society. The framing of the show as an opera for beggars was not just an artistic choice, though. It was also a deliberate reference to its source material, John Gay's The Beggar's Opera. Brecht first came across Gay's Ballad opera in late 1927, when Elisabeth Hauptmann, his lover at the time, began translating it into German after receiving a copy from friends in England. During this time, Brecht was working on a play called Fleischhacker, and he attempted to pitch it to the impresario, or in modern terms producer, Ernst Josef Aufrecht. Ironically enough, Brecht had already promised the play to another producer, but Aufrecht was not interested in it anyway. But he still needed a production to launch his new theater company at the Theater am Schiffbauerdamm. So Brecht pitched Elisabeth Hauptmann's translation of The Beggar's Opera, passing it off as his own. This interested Aufrecht, and the two would sign a contract soon thereafter. And given that Brecht was involved, the play was already set up for controversy. As a playwright, Brecht was not interested in making people feel comfortable while at the theater. In fact, he coined the term Verfremdungseffekt, or as translated by John Willett, the alienation effect. This is the idea that theater should not be there to console or entertain the audience, but instead engage them directly. You might already be familiar with this idea due to phrases like breaking the fourth wall that are common today. For Brecht, theater was a way of challenging audience members and making them think critically about the world. Threepenny Opera is an interesting example of this because of how it depicted counterculture that was reflected in the Weimar Republic, but not often seen on stage. There was also a political component to this, with Brecht's interest in socialism also making the show a commentary on capitalism and bourgeois society. But the Threepenny Opera isn't just a play. As the name suggests, it's also an opera, though it rides the fine line between opera and musical theater. As a result, it features songs from composer Kurt Weill, one of Brecht's frequent collaborators and an essential component of fleshing out the engaging, alienating, and memorable music that defines the show for many. Along with Weill's collaboration came the involvement of Lotte Lenya, the actress who would originate the role of Low Dive Jenny, a prostitute who previously had a relationship with Mackie. In the original production, Mackie was portrayed by Harald Paulsen, who Lotte Lenya once described as vain, even for an actor. Just a few days before the production premiered, he demanded that his character have a better introduction, specifically asking for a number to introduce Mackie, also known in the German version as Mackie Messer, or Mack the Knife. Brecht obliged, writing 9 verses for a new song to introduce the character. Weill would set 6 of those verses to music, resulting in the song Die Moritat von Mackie Messer, often shortened to Mackie Messer. Moritat is the German word for murder ballad, specifically referring to the genre of songs that are traditionally sung by troubadours or street musicians, telling stories about, well, murder. In the Threepenny Opera, the introductory song was sung by an unnamed street singer, originally portrayed by the cabaret comedian Kurt Garon. The song begins with a very folky style, but it eventually transitions into a sort of foxtrot that reveals the strong influence of US American jazz throughout the show. The lyrics of the song set the stage well for the rest of the show. They're grotesque, descriptive, and poetic. In other words, they're everything that keeps the audience on the edge of their seats. Und der Haifisch, der hat Zähne, und die trägt im Gesicht. Und Mackie, der hat ein Messer, doch das Messer sieht man nicht an einem schönen blauen Sonntag. Liegt ein toter Mann am Strand und ein Mensch geht die Ecke, den man Mackie Messer nennt. The Threepenny Opera premiered on August 31st, 1928 to a poor reception, but it would quickly become a hit and play over 400 times within the following 2 years. It was also a hit throughout Europe, and by the mid-30s it had been translated into 18 different languages. However, not everybody was a fan of the show. To the rapidly growing National Socialist Party in Germany, the show represented degeneracy, depicting many things that the Nazis associated not only with Berlin counterculture, but the supposed decline of German culture. As a result, many performances of the show were either interrupted or straight up cancelled by Nazis, and when Hitler seized power in 1933, the Threepenny Opera was officially banned in the country. Klecht, Weil, and Lenya would enter exile, later heading to the US, while Guéron, the Jewish comedian who sang Mack the Knife, was eventually murdered at Auschwitz. However, Paulsen, the actor who portrayed Mackie, became a devout National Socialist and would have a strong influence in German theater until the end of World War II. Despite being banned in its country of origin, the Threepenny Opera would find a new life in the United States. US Americans would first encounter the work through the 1931 movie adaptation by G.W. Pabst, but this was the German text. The first translation of the production into English by Gifford Cochran and Gerald Krimsky premiered on Broadway in 1933, but it only lasted for 10 performances. The unlikely comeback venues for Threepenny turned out to be institutions of higher learning. In 1941, Lenya and Weil presented the Moritat at a war bond drive at Hunter College. Desmond Vesey's 1937 British translation of the opera, as revised by Eric Bentley, was staged at the University of Illinois at Urbana in 1946. However, Mackie Messer would truly catch on with the new translation by composer Mark Blitzstein in 1952. Premiered as a concert version of the show at Brandeis University, this translation also had star power. Not only did Leonard Bernstein conduct, but Lotte Lenya also reprised her role as Low Dive Jenny. This concert version would eventually transform into the longest-running musical of the time, with a fully staged production opening at the Theatre des Lys in Greenwich Village and closing on December 17, 1961, after 2,611 performances. This is where the meaning of the song starts to get lost in translation. Though the Blitzstein version does translate the original text well, it appears to have been tailored for the US-American sensibility, resulting in a few key changes. For example, there's no mention of a Moritat in the title. Instead of being a murder ballad, the title was changed to just the Ballad of Mack the Knife. This is subtle, but an important distinction. The lyrics are still about a murderer, but in the German version that's framed within the specific genre of Moritat. In English, that association is lost in the more nuanced and neutral label of ballad. There's also an interesting addition to the lyrics that makes it sound distinctly US-American. The word deer.
Oh, the shark has pretty teeth, dear.
As a slang word, deer sounds polite and cordial. Again, a slight change, but it does affect the tone of the song significantly. What was once a murder ballad sung as a warning now sounds more like a story told by a personable narrator. After its newfound popularity thanks to the Blitzstein translation, Mack the Knife would begin the transformation into a jazz standard. This was spearheaded by Louis Armstrong, who recorded the song in 1955. There are a few key components in Louis Armstrong's recording that further distance the song from the Threepenny Opera. Right off the bat, there's a cheeky intro quote that gives it a unique personality.
Dig, man, there goes Mack the Knife.
Instead of the song being a harrowing, slow introduction, it's a quick ditty. Mack the Knife just passed by Armstrong, so the recording picks up tempo. This faster tempo is made even more distinct by Armstrong's cheery performance and affect, making the song more about the personality of the narrator and less about Mack the Knife. This new narrative focus is made even more apparent by Armstrong's inclusion of Lotte Lenya in the lyrics as one of Mackie's victims. This was reportedly done because of Lenya's presence in the room during the recording session, but it also introduces a sense of bravado to the recording. After listing off all of the victims, Armstrong sings "Take It Away, Sat," referring to himself and making it clear that in the song the narrator is just as important as Mack the Knife himself. After Louis Armstrong's recording was released, the jazz standard version of the song became a trend in US American pop music. However, the most important part of this is how the song was framed. It wasn't even called a ballad anymore. it was just called Mack the Knife. And the narrator is not only telling the murderous story in a charming way, but the line is being blurred between narrator and subject. Mack the Knife is still a murderer, but now he's a charming one who the narrator empathizes with. The idiom of jazz also contributed to this. Louis Armstrong adding charming inflections to the ends of phrases made way for other performers to add scatting and other forms of improv that took the focus off of what they were saying and placed it on how they were saying it. This is where I think the song becomes uniquely interesting. You have a song that was written as an introduction for a dark and controversial show, and not only does it become a jazz standard, but it becomes a commercial pop hit in the United States. This is also where it really goes off the rails. You see, when the Threepenny Opera was being performed in Greenwich Village, the singer Bobby Darin was in the audience, and as a result, Mack the Knife began making its way into his routines. Against the wishes of his manager at the time, who didn't want him to ruin his rock and roll image, Darin recorded the song in 1958 and took Louis Armstrong's bravado-filled interpretation to a new level. With Bobby Darin's version, the song was still about murder, but mainly about charm. Through his added lyrics, improvisations, and inflections, such as comically screaming "eek" in response to the line about the dead body, Darin turned Mack the Knife into a lighthearted comic number. This version also brought a unique musical gesture to the song: modulation. In other words, changing the key signature. By modulating up a half step at almost every stanza, Darin's version gave a new flavor that showed off musical talent and added difficulty to the song. Though Mack the Knife has had many associations throughout the years, the charming versions pioneered by Louis Armstrong and Bobby Darin are the ones that have been the most influential on pop culture in general. These recordings were also the two recordings chosen for the National Recording Registry, highlighting their influence on US American culture. For instance, McDonald's even ran an ad campaign in the 80s called Mack Tonight that used the song about a murder ballad to advertise hamburgers, just because it had the word Mac in it, which was used as a reference to the famous Big Mac burger. And no, unfortunately I'm not making that up.
It's a good time for a great taste dinner at McDonald's. It's Mack the Knife. Come on, make it Mack the Knife.
This new US American version of Mack the Knife would become popular all around the world, but it would be innovated upon once again in Berlin thanks to Ella Fitzgerald. In a 1960 performance at the Deutschlandhalle in Berlin, she began singing the song, even saying that it was her first time doing it and she hoped she'd remember all the words. That offhand comment ended up being realized when Fitzgerald reached the third stanza of the song and couldn't remember the lyrics.
Oh, what's the next chorus to this song now? This is the one now. I don't know.
Ella Fitzgerald turned her mistake into an elegant moment, not only impressing the audience, but eventually winning a Grammy for her performance. However, this moment also further changed the meaning of the song within a US American context. Mack the Knife became so intertwined with entertainment and bravado that it didn't even need the lyrics anymore to tell a story. The song that was originally explicitly focused on narrative had become a fun performance piece. Sure, that's the nature of many jazz standards, but it's had such an influence on modern performances of Mack the Knife that it's important to mention. Since the mid-20th century, Mack the Knife has had two identities. Sometimes it's been the US American jazz standard, but some versions have also retained the identity of Mackie Messer, or in other words, the original German lyrics that still framed the song as a murder ballad. However, there have also been mixtures of these two identities. For example, the German singer Hildegard Knef often mixed the two, having jazz arrangements and performance styles while singing the German lyrics in a narrative way. On top of this, she also recorded versions of the song in both German and English, showing how the language really affected performances of the song. In another example, Wolfgang Sauer recorded the song in German, but while mimicking the style of Bobby Darin. However, at the end of the song, he fully breaks out into the Bobby Darin homage, switching to Darin's English lyrics. The song also took on pop associations outside of jazz. Since the song was such a popular hit, it makes sense that musicians would interpret it simply as a standard now, outside of the original context. The Italian musician Domenico Modugno performed a version of the song that's more of a classic pop rock song, while the US American musician Dave Van Ronk performed the song in a New York City folk style that was also removed from all pre-established versions.
And the shark has pretty teeth, dear, and he shows them pearly white.
Interestingly enough, though, the folk version of the song also helps it take on more of the original murder ballad quality, likely due to the lineage of folk singers coming from troubadours and also being an extension of the murder ballad genre. However, there were many people who weren't satisfied with the English trajectory of the song. In fact, many wanted an English version that compared to the German version. In other words, they wanted one that communicated the dark, grim, but poetic text. Those looking for different English translations can now turn to two well-known options. The 1976 Mannheim Willett one that retains the name of Moritat, and the Robert David McDonald and Jeremy Sams version that's more explicit as a way of recapturing the darker spirit of the original. Though these translations have their place in pop music and interpretations of the song, the Blitzstein version is still the most popular translation of the song and arguably even more popular than the original Brecht text. Regardless of which version you prefer, it's clear that Mack the Knife is one of the most uniquely influential songs of the 20th century. It's also a wonderful case study for how music can change and have different impacts depending on cultural context. Whether it's the provocative socialist context from the original Weimar Republic production, or the upbeat Ella Fitzgerald version with half the lyrics, Mack the Knife is a dynamic song that has become pure entertainment. And though Brecht and Weil's goal wasn't necessarily to entertain audiences, perhaps they were still successful with making societal commentary, even with the diluted US American version. Not only did the song get early 20th century Berlin to confront the hypocrisies in bourgeois society, but it also got multiple generations of Americans to cheerily empathize with the serial killer, bringing to the forefront the fact that with the right melody and commercial success, you can truly get people to sing about anything. So the next time that you hear Mack the Knife, I want you to think about what you're listening to and how that affects the meaning of the song. Because, like Bertolt Brecht once said, art is not a mirror held up to reality, but a hammer with which to shape it. Wachte auf und war geschändet, Mackie, welches war dein Preis? Woken up and violated, Mackie, how much did you charge?